Eliza Mortimer first saw the mirror in an antique shop on the outskirts of town, a place where dust seemed to settle not just on the furniture but on time itself. The shopkeeper, a wiry old man with parchment-thin skin, watched her with a knowing glint in his cataract-clouded eyes as she ran her fingers over the frame. It was ornate, its silver vines curling like frozen smoke, its glass strangely deep, as if it held more than just her reflection. "That's not for sale," the man rasped, his voice brittle as dried leaves. Eliza tilted her head. "Then why display it?" He hesitated, shifting on his feet. Some things stay put for a reason. Something in her, perhaps the same restless curiosity that had led her to study folklore and forgotten histories, urged her to press on. "Every object has a story. What's this one's?" The old man sighed and leaned in, his breath carrying the scent of damp paper. "That mirror don't just show your reflection. It knows you. Knows things you hide, even from yourself." Eliza let out a soft laugh. "You mean it's haunted?" "Haunted ain't the right word," he muttered. "It listens. And sometimes, it talks back." She should have walked away then. Any sensible person would have. But the way the mirror caught the dim light, the way the silver frame felt cool even beneath the heat of her skin, it fascinated her. "What if I buy it anyway?" she asked. The old man's face twitched, as if he were caught between warning her and letting her make her own mistakes. After a long silence, he shook his head. "It'll find its way to who it wants. If that's you, I won't stop it." 2 days later, the mirror arrived at her door, though she had never paid for it. There was no return address, no delivery receipt. Only a note, scrawled in spidery handwriting. "You wanted the story. Now listen." That night, Eliza set the mirror against the wall of her dimly lit study. It fit too perfectly, as if the space had been waiting for it. She examined her reflection, the same sharp features, the same tired eyes, but something about the depth of the glass unsettled her. "A trick of the light," she told herself. "Just an old mirror, nothing more." Yet, when she turned to leave, the reflection did not move. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned back to face it. Her reflection, no, not quite her, was watching her with an unreadable expression. Then, lips that weren't hers curved into a slow, knowing smile. Eliza stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of books. The reflection remained still, save for its eyes, deep, dark, and far too aware. A whisper, soft as silk, slithered through the room. "Now that you've found me, Eliza, I can finally speak." The lamp flickered. A chill curled around her spine. And the mirror laughed. Eliza stood frozen, her breath shallow, eyes locked onto the impossible thing before her. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a window, a presence. And it had spoken. She wanted to believe she had imagined it, that exhaustion had twisted her senses, but the whisper still clung to the air, curling around her like invisible tendrils. The laugh, low and knowing, had not been hers. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer, peering into the glass. Her reflection stood as it should now, mirroring her every movement. The eerie stillness from before had passed, leaving only the sharp hammering of her heart in its wake. A trick of the mind. That's all it was. With a shaking breath, she muttered, "I'm losing it." "No, Eliza," the voice cooed. "You're only just finding it." Her stomach clenched. The voice did not echo in the room. It came from inside her head, from the depths of the glass. The study lamp flickered again, its dim glow casting long, shifting shadows. The bookshelves, the papers scattered across her desk, the antique clock ticking faintly against the silence, all seemed distant now, unreal, as if the only thing that truly existed was the mirror and the thing that watched from within it. With trembling fingers, she reached forward, her fingertips grazing the cool surface of the glass. A whisper of static curled beneath her skin, a sensation like stepping barefoot onto an icy lake. "Who are you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The reflection tilted its head, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You already know." Eliza swallowed hard. "I don't." "You will." She yanked her hand away as if burned, stumbling back. The mirror didn't distort, didn't ripple like water. It remained perfectly still. But she could feel it watching. This was ridiculous. It was just a mirror. a relic from some forgotten past. And yet, she forced herself to turn away, forcing her mind to rationality. This was stress. Sleepless nights. An overactive imagination fueled by too many stories. But deep down, beneath the layers of logic she tried to cling to, something whispered a truth she wasn't ready to accept. The mirror knew her. And it wasn't done speaking. That night, she dreamt of silver corridors, endless and winding, their walls lined with mirrors stretching into infinity. As she walked, her reflection moved alongside her, but it wasn't quite right. Its eyes were sharper, its smile just a fraction too slow. A voice, low and ancient, curled through the air. "Come closer, Eliza. Look deeper." She tried to resist, but her feet carried her forward, drawn toward a grand mirror at the end of the corridor. It was taller than the others, its frame twisting like wrought iron vines. The glass was dark, swallowing the dim glow of the space around it. She hesitated, and then her reflection stepped forward, without her. Eliza's breath hitched. The mirrored version of herself leaned in, pressing both hands against the other side of the glass. Its lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one hand and beckoned her forward. Eliza woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The room was quiet. Still. But when she turned toward the mirror, she swore, just for a moment, that the reflection wasn't her own. Morning light bled through the curtains, casting soft golden streaks across the study. The mirror sat where she had left it, perfectly still, its silver frame catching the light like frozen lightning. Eliza told herself that last night had been nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on her. The mind was a fragile thing, and dreams were only echoes of waking fears. And yet, as she stood before the mirror, she hesitated. Her reflection gazed back, just as it should. No eerie smiles. No knowing tilts of the head. Just her, Eliza Mortimer, exhausted and pale. But the longer she stared, the more an unease crept through her. Had the glass always been this deep? She pressed her lips into a thin line. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. "Am I?" Eliza's heart lurched. The voice was softer this time, slithering through the space between her thoughts. She staggered back, her hands gripping the edge of her desk for balance. The study was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock. No, this had to stop. Steeling herself, she lifted the mirror from the wall, gripping it tightly by its cold silver frame. It was heavier than she expected, unnaturally so. The thought struck her suddenly. What if she just got rid of it? Hauled it to the curb? Smashed it into 1,000 glittering shards? A ripple ran across the glass. Her reflection smiled. Not her. Not her. Eliza gasped and nearly dropped the mirror. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stumbled back, her breath ragged. The smile on the reflection faded, shifting into something calmer, something patient. "You won't throw me away," the voice murmured. "You don't want to." Eliza shook her head violently. "You don't know what I want." The mirror darkened, the silver vines along its edges seeming to twist, as though curling in satisfaction. The reflection's eyes gleamed. "Oh, but I do." A cold wind rushed through the study, though the windows were shut tight. Papers fluttered from her desk, the lamp flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floor, bending toward the mirror like reaching hands. Eliza's breath came fast and shallow. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand her ground. "What are you?" she demanded. The reflection tilted its head, considering. "I am a memory. A promise. A whisper left behind." The words coiled around her, sinking into her bones. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the room settled. The light from the window softened, the shadows shrank back into place. The mirror stilled, and Eliza's reflection, her true reflection, returned, wide-eyed and trembling. She let out a shaky breath. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, leaving her dizzy. The mirror wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just an echo of something old. It knew her, and worse still, it was waiting. Eliza avoided the mirror for the rest of the day. She buried herself in work, piling her desk with research papers, old books, anything to keep her mind occupied. She told herself that exhaustion had twisted her senses, that the whispering voice was nothing but an overactive imagination taunting her. But deep down, she knew better. As night fell, unease slithered through her chest. The mirror sat against the far wall, untouched but not forgotten. It was a presence now, something she could feel even when her back was turned. She told herself she wouldn't look at it. She failed. Drawn by a force she couldn't name, Eliza stepped closer. The silver frame gleamed in the dim light, intricate and cold beneath her fingertips. The glass was smooth, flawless, too flawless. A deep, bottomless black seemed to lurk beneath its surface, as if the reflection was only the first layer of something far more vast. A shiver ran down her spine. "Do you want to know?" The voice came again, soft as breath, curling around her like smoke. Eliza swallowed hard. "Know what?" The mirror darkened, the glass shifting like ink dispersing in water. And then, a scene unfolded. It was a memory, but not one she had ever recalled before. She saw herself as a child, no more than 7 or 8, sitting on the floor of her childhood bedroom. A small, handheld mirror rested in her lap. She was whispering to it, giggling, her young face filled with innocent delight. Eliza's stomach clenched. She had no memory of this moment, no recollection of ever speaking to a mirror like it was a friend. Yet, as she watched, her younger self paused, tilting her head as if listening. Then, ever so slowly, she nodded. The scene wavered, distorting like ripples on water, and for the briefest second, just before the memory faded, her childhood reflection smiled. Not a child's smile. Not innocent. Not hers. Eliza staggered back, her breath catching in her throat. The mirror returned to normal, showing only her pale, horrified face. She pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. No. No. This was impossible. She had never spoken to a mirror as a child. She would have remembered. Wouldn't she? The mirror pulsed faintly, as though amused. "There are things you have forgotten, Eliza." Her hands curled into fists. "That's not real." "It is." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "If it's real," she whispered, voice trembling, "then tell me, what did I say?" The reflection's lips parted, speaking words she did not hear. But she felt them. A chill ran through her veins, deep and sharp as a knife. Somewhere in the depths of her mind, something stirred. A memory long buried. A whisper from the past. And for the first time, she was afraid to remember. Eliza barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the memory, the small girl she once was, whispering to her reflection as though it were an old friend. The way the child's lips moved, forming words she could not hear. The way the reflection wasn't quite hers. She had never questioned her childhood before. Never wondered if pieces of it had been lost to time, buried beneath years of study and solitude. But now, something gnawed at the edges of her mind, something unfinished, something waiting to be found. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. The phone rang 5 times before a familiar voice answered, warm but laced with the usual undercurrent of worry. "Eliza, this is a surprise." She swallowed, gripping the phone tighter. "Hey, Mom. I had a question about when I was little." A pause. Then, a soft chuckle. "Darling, you never ask about the past. Everything all right?" "No. Not even close. Eliza hesitated. "Did I ever have an imaginary friend?" Silence. The quiet stretched too long. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was careful. "Why would you ask that?" Eliza's grip tightened. "Because I think I did. And I don't remember them." Her mother sighed, the kind of sigh that carried weight, that hinted at things unsaid. "It wasn't a friend, exactly," she murmured. "You used to talk to your mirror." A cold shiver ran through Eliza's spine. She forced her voice to remain steady. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, "You had this little handheld mirror. You carried it everywhere. You'd sit in front of it for hours, whispering. I thought it was just a phase. But then, one day, you stopped." Eliza's heart pounded. Why? Her mother hesitated. Because you were afraid. She felt the blood drain from her face. Afraid of what? Her mother's voice softened, as if reaching across the years to comfort the child she had been. You told me it started speaking back. Eliza nearly dropped the phone. Her breath came too fast, too shallow, the world tilting beneath her feet. This wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. But deep down, she knew it was. Eliza, her mother said gently, is something wrong? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Then, from across the room, a whisper. You knew me once. Eliza's breath hitched. Slowly, stiffly, she turned toward the mirror. Her reflection stood still, unchanged. But the whisper had not come from her lips. It had come from inside the glass. The air in the study thickened, pressing against her like unseen hands. Eliza! Her mother's voice was distant now, drowned beneath the cold hush that filled the space. A name curled at the edge of her mind, ghostly, unfinished. Something she had whispered long ago. Something she had promised. And in the glass, her reflection smiled. Eliza sat in silence long after the call ended. The weight of her mother's words pressed against her ribs, tightening like a slowly closing fist. You told me it started speaking back. She had no memory of this. None. But the mirror did. Across the room, the glass remained still, its silver frame glinting in the dim light. It was waiting. The whisper had not come again, but Eliza felt it lingering in the air, pressing against the edges of her mind like a presence just out of sight. She needed to know. With slow, deliberate steps, she approached the mirror. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, each step louder than the last. When she reached the frame, she hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the cool silver vines. And then, barely above a breath, "What is your name?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the glass darkened, shadows swirling beneath the surface like ink spilled in water. A shape emerged, a reflection shifting, but it was not hers. Not entirely. It looked like her, yes, but the eyes were older, deeper. The way the lips curved into a slow, knowing smile was something entirely other. The reflection tilted its head, as if considering her. Then, with a voice soft as silk and deep as the void, it spoke. You already know. A shiver ran down Eliza's spine. The words echoed, laced with familiarity, wrapping around her like the memory of a half-forgotten dream. No, she whispered. I don't. The mirror pulsed faintly, the surface rippling as though disturbed by an unseen touch. The reflection leaned forward, close enough that Eliza swore she could feel cold breath ghost across her skin. Then let me remind you. A rush of air swirled through the room, though the windows were shut. The lamp flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. The silver vines along the frame twisted, shifting into new shapes, no longer abstract patterns, but letters. A name. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She knew it. Somewhere, deep in the marrow of her bones, she knew it. Her lips parted, the name forming before she even realized she was speaking. Ender. The lamp sputtered out. Darkness swallowed the room. The whisper returned, curling through the pitch-black air like a hand brushing against her cheek. Say it, Eliza. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something ancient, something waiting. Eliza clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. No. A pause. Then, the reflection's expression darkened. You promised. A sudden pressure wrapped around her chest, invisible fingers tightening, squeezing. A cold dread sank its claws into her spine. And in the mirror, the reflection did not move. But something behind it did. A shape. A shadow. Something waiting just beyond the glass. Watching. Waiting. For her to remember. Eliza couldn't breathe. The pressure around her chest tightened, invisible hands pressing against her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. The whisper curled through the room like smoke, thick and inescapable. You promised, Eliza. The reflection wasn't her anymore. Not entirely. The eyes had darkened into something endless, and behind it, behind the glass, something was moving. A shape, shifting like liquid shadow. No features, no form. Just a presence. Waiting. The name pulsed at the edges of her mind, pressing against her skull like a half-forgotten song. If she spoke it, if she let it slip from her tongue, something would change. Something would end. Or something would begin. Eliza forced her hands against the desk behind her, anchoring herself in the real world, the solid world. "I don't remember," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The mirror hummed. A sickening, pulsing sound, as though something behind it was breathing. "You do." Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. The memory clawed its way to the surface. A small girl. A handheld mirror. A whispered name. A promise. Her younger self's voice echoed in the depths of her mind, barely more than a breath. "If I say your name, you'll always be with me. Right?" The shadow in the mirror moved closer. Eliza squeezed her eyes shut. No. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the memory pressed on. A child's fingers tracing the silver frame. A reflection that did not quite match. A name, whispered in the dark. And then, a hand, reaching from the glass. Eliza's eyes snapped open. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a doorway. The glass had turned liquid, shifting and undulating like a living thing. The shape inside, her reflection, or something that used to be her, was reaching through. And its hand was inches from her face. "Let me in." Eliza's breath hitched. No. Not in. Out. A terrible, gut-wrenching realization crashed into her like a wave. She had spoken the name before. Not once. Not twice. Many times. She had been calling to it since she was a child, whispering its name into the glass, feeding it, binding it to her. And now it was collecting. Her own voice echoed in her ears, a forgotten memory resurfacing. "If I say your name, you'll always be with me." But she had never considered what that truly meant. The hand lunged forward, fingers brushing her skin. And Eliza did the only thing she could. She grabbed the mirror. Not to drop it. Not to smash it. But to pull. A horrible, wailing cry erupted from the glass as Eliza yanked with everything she had, reversing the pull, dragging the thing back toward the mirror instead of letting it escape. The air howled around her, a windless storm, books flying from shelves, the lamp bursting into shards of glass. The shadow shrieked, twisting, clawing, but she did not let go. The silver frame burned beneath her fingers. The glass rippled violently. And then, with a sound like shattering ice, the mirror collapsed inward, swallowing the reflection whole. The room fell into silence. Eliza stumbled backward, gasping for breath, her hands burning from the cold that had clung to the frame. The mirror lay at her feet, no longer a perfect surface, but cracked, fractured, its silver vines blackened, twisted. The reflection inside was gone. She stared at it, heart hammering. Waiting. Nothing moved. For the first time in days, the mirror was just a mirror. She let out a shaky breath. Then, without hesitation, she lifted it, walked to the fireplace, and hurled it into the flames. The silver curled, the glass blackened. And from the depths of the fire, she swore she heard one last whisper. "You were supposed to let me out." The flames roared. Eliza watched until the glass was nothing but ash. And when she turned away, her reflection, in the window pane, smiled. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. If you're craving more mysteries, thrillers, and spine-chilling tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss out on the next chapter. The darkness is always waiting, and the next story could be just around the corner. See you in the next one, if you dare.